An old man like you wouldn't know the first thing about a rifle like this. The words, slick with the casual arrogance of youth, sliced through the hot afternoon air. Sergeant Gunner Thorne, a man whose chest was a billboard of marksmanship badges, smirked at his squad. They chuckled, a chorus of condescending agreement. The old janitor, Silas, just continued sweeping up spent brass casings. His movements slow and deliberate, the rhythmic scrape of his broom the only reply. If you believe true heroes don't always wear their medals on the outside, type respect in the comments right now. For 30 years, Silas Vance had been a fixture at the Parris Island training facility, as much a part of the landscape as the salt marshes and the incessant calls of the drill instructors. He was a ghost in gray overalls, a man with a stooped back and hands gnarled like ancient tree roots. The young Marines, forged in the fires of modern warfare and digital precision, saw only a relic. They saw the faded pallor of his skin, the watery blue of his eyes that seemed to look through them rather than at them, and they dismissed him. He was the man who cleaned their mess, who quietly refilled the water coolers, who faded into the background while they honed the art of war. They had no idea that the quiet, shuffling man had forgotten more about windage, elevation, and the delicate physics of a bullet's flight than they would ever learn. They didn't know that those gnarled hands once held a nation's secrets with a steadiness that defied belief, cradling a custom-built rifle with the tenderness of a lover and the cold purpose of an executioner. His past was a locked room, and he had long ago thrown away the key. The day was blistering, the kind of South Carolina heat that shimmered off the rifle range in waves, distorting the distant targets into blurry apparitions. Sergeant Thorne and his elite scout sniper platoon were on the line, practicing for the All-Marine Corps shooting competition. Thorne was the reigning champion, a man whose confidence bordered on insufferable. But today he was frustrated. The brass had introduced a new challenge, a 1,500-yard target, a distance that pushed their state-of-the-art M40A6 rifles to the absolute limit of their capability. Shot after shot, Thorne and his men missed. The wind, a fickle and invisible enemy, toyed with their calculations. Their bullets, miracles of engineering, drifted wide, kicking up puffs of dust to the left, to the right, below the impossibly small steel plate. Curses grew louder, frustration mounting with every silent failure. Silas worked at the edge of the firing line, his broom whispering across the concrete. He could feel their frustration like a static charge in the air. He could feel the subtle shifts in the wind on his wrinkled cheek, reading its currents like a language he'd known his entire life. He heard Thorne roar in disgust after another miss. It's impossible. The crosswind is gusting unpredictably. No one can make this shot. He slammed a fresh magazine into his rifle with unnecessary force, his jaw tight. It was then that his angry eyes fell on Silas, who had paused for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant heat haze. The old man's stillness seemed to mock the sergeant's frantic efforts. "What are you looking at, old-timer?" Thorne barked, his voice dripping with disdain. "Got some advice from your years of pushing a broom? Maybe I should use it to check the wind," the other Marines snickered. Silas didn't respond, his eyes still locked downrange. This silent defiance was more infuriating to Thorne than any retort. He strode over to the old man, invading his personal space. "I'm talking to you. You think you could do better? Bet your hands are too shaky to even hold this thing steady, let alone hit anything." He thrust the multi-thousand-dollar rifle towards Silas, a cruel and public challenge. The laughter from the squad died, replaced by a tense curiosity. They expected the old man to shrink back, to stammer an apology and scurry away. For a long moment Silas did nothing. He just stood there, the broom handle held loosely in one hand. A lifetime of slights, of being invisible, of being judged by the stoop in his shoulders and the weariness in his face, seemed to coalesce in that single, charged moment. He slowly, deliberately, leaned his broom against the wall. He turned to face the sergeant, and for the first time, his watery blue eyes seemed to clear, focusing on Thorne with an intensity that was startling. The air crackled. "All right," Silas said, his voice raspy from disuse, but perfectly calm. "I'll give it a try." A wave of disbelief, followed by derisive laughter, rippled through the young Marines. Thorne's grin was predatory. "You heard him, boys. The janitor is going to show us how it's done." The range officer, a seasoned gunnery sergeant, hesitated. It was a gross violation of protocol. But something in the old man's demeanor, a sudden, profound shift from frail custodian to something else entirely, made him pause. He looked at Thorne's mocking face, then back at the old man's quiet resolve. "Fine," the gunny sighed, rubbing his temples. "One shot. Let's get this circus over with." Silas walked towards the firing position. As he approached the rifle lying on the shooting mat, a transformation began. His stooped shoulders straightened, the curve in his spine seemingly vanishing. He moved with a fluid economy of motion that was jarringly out of place with his aged appearance. He didn't just pick up the rifle. He flowed around it, his hands finding their places on the stock and grip with an unnatural familiarity, as if they were extensions of his own body. The Marines fell silent, their smirks faltering. This was not the clumsy fumbling they had expected. Silas settled behind the weapon, his body melting into the earth. He ignored the advanced digital scope. Instead, he closed his eyes for a full 10 seconds, his face tilted slightly, feeling the wind. He then opened them, and his hand went to the elevation and windage knobs. He didn't look at the markings. He just twisted them, the precise, audible clicks echoing in the sudden silence. Click, 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 click. He was tuning the rifle like a concert violinist tuning his instrument, all by feel and sound. He pulled the stock into the hollow of his shoulder, and the rifle, a heavy and cumbersome weapon for most, looked like it was a part of him. The entire platoon held its breath. Silas's own breathing slowed until it was almost imperceptible. He exhaled halfway, and the world seemed to stop. There was no hesitation, no tremor, just a smooth, clean press of the trigger. The rifle boomed, a deafening crack that sent a shockwave across the range. Everyone's eyes snapped to the spotting scopes, focusing on the distant target. For a second, there was nothing. Then, a full 2 seconds after the shot, a sound traveled back to them, carried on the wind, a high, clear, definitive ping. It was a sound no one had heard all day. A young corporal, his eye glued to his scope, gasped. "Hit," he whispered, his voice cracking with disbelief. "Dead, dead center." Bullseye. Thorne shoved him aside, peering into the scope himself. He saw it. A perfect, dark hole punched directly in the center of the steel plate, not an inch off. It wasn't just a hit. It was a perfect shot, a 1 in a million shot made under impossible conditions. Before anyone could process it, Silas ejected the spent casing, chambered another round, and fired again. Boom! 2 seconds later, ping. The corporal at the scope screamed. "He did it again, sir. I think he put the second round through the first hole." A stunned, reverent silence fell over the rifle range. The heat, the wind, the arrogance. It all evaporated, replaced by a single, overwhelming question. Who is this man? Just then, a black staff car rolled up the service road, kicking up a cloud of dust. It stopped behind the firing line, and the rear door opened. Out stepped General Marcus Thorne, the base commander, a man whose presence commanded immediate and absolute respect. He was on a routine inspection tour and had decided to observe the platoon's practice. He took in the bizarre scene. His top sniper team standing frozen like statues, a rifle smoking on the line, and a janitor slowly getting up from behind it. The general's eyes narrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. Then, his eyes locked onto the old man's profile as Silas turned. The general froze. His face went pale. The 2-star general, a man who had seen combat in 3 different decades, looked as if he had seen a ghost. "Vance?" the general breathed, the name a soft, incredulous whisper. He started walking forward, his polished shoes crunching on the gravel, his gaze fixed solely on Silas. He walked right past Sergeant Thorne, who had snapped to a rigid salute, ignoring him completely. "Silas? Silas Ghost Vance." The general stopped a few feet from Silas, his voice thick with an emotion the Marines had never heard from him. Awe. Sergeant Thorne's jaw went slack. The name Ghost was legend, a campfire story told in whispers among snipers. A mythical figure from the early days of the global war on terror, a Marine scout sniper whose exploits were so incredible they were officially classified as battlefield rumors to maintain operational security. They were stories of impossible shots, of entire enemy platoons neutralized by a single, unseen phantom. General Thorne turned slowly, his eyes now blazing with a cold fire as he looked at his namesake, Sergeant Thorne. Sergeant. The general's voice was low and dangerous. Do you have any idea who you just insulted? The sergeant swallowed hard, his face ashen. Sir, I don't. You don't, because his file is sealed at a level you couldn't access with a presidential order. The general roared, his voice thundering across the range. We are standing on this range, using marksmanship principles that were written based on his after-action reports. The impossible 1,500-yard shot you've been failing at all day? We call that Vance's minimum in the intelligence community because he made a confirmed kill at 2,475 yards with a modified M40 in Afghanistan. A shot the Pentagon officially denied because they didn't believe it was physically possible until the drone footage proved it. The general stepped closer to the humiliated sergeant, his voice dropping to a furious hiss. This man, this old-timer you mocked, held off an enemy ambush single-handedly for 72 hours, protecting a downed Black Hawk crew until reinforcements could arrive. He did it with a shattered arm and 3 rounds left in his magazine. The uniform you wear? He bled all over his. The freedom you protect? He paid for it with pieces of his soul you can't even imagine. And you, in your arrogance, handed him a rifle and dared him to shoot? You are not fit to carry his cleaning supplies. Shame, hot and total, washed over Sergeant Thorne and his men. They looked at Silas, truly seeing him for the first time. They saw not a janitor, but a living monument. Thorne, his eyes filled with tears of humiliation, took a step forward, his body rigid with attention. He raised his hand in the sharpest salute of his life. Sir, he said to Silas, his voice breaking, I apologize. My disrespect was inexcusable. I am not worthy of your presence. Silas looked at the young, broken Marine. He saw not an enemy, but a reflection of his own long-lost youth. He gave a small, weary nod. At ease, Sergeant, he said softly. The incident on the range changed everything. Silas was offered a highly paid role as a master instructor, a position that came with honors and a hefty pension. He politely declined. He didn't want the attention or the accolades. He did, however, agree to quietly mentor a few young Marines who were struggling. The story of that day became the new legend of Parris Island. Sergeant Gunner Thorne was never the same. His arrogance was gone, replaced by a profound and quiet humility that made him not just a better shooter, but a better leader, a better man. He made it his personal duty to ensure that every Marine who set foot on that range knew the story of the janitor who was a king. The central lesson became clear. Heroes don't fade away. They just change their uniforms. Sometimes, they wear overalls, and their battlefields become the quiet corridors and forgotten corners of the world they fought so hard to protect. The most important targets aren't always downrange. Sometimes, they are the prejudices and judgments we hold inside our own hearts. Weeks later, a young private, struggling to qualify on the range, was found sitting on a bench, his head in his hands on the verge of washing out. Silas Vance sat down next to him, not with a rifle, but with 2 cups of coffee from the mess hall. He didn't talk about sight alignment or trigger control. He talked about breathing, about finding the quiet center in the storm. He talked about how the hardest battles are not with the enemy, but with yourself. The lingering image was not of a legendary sniper, but of a kind old man, his gnarled hands wrapped around a warm cup, passing on a legacy not of killing, but of quiet strength and enduring dignity. If you believe that we should honor every single veteran, no matter what path they walk after their service, then subscribe to this channel and help us share the stories of the silent heroes who walk among us every day.